Hey everyone, just a quick announcement before the main presentation to let you know that channel memberships are now available at Wrestling Bios. Click the join button or check the link in the video description for more information. Becoming a channel member lets you support me and my work, and it also grants you access to Wrestling Bios Weekly, an audio show where I talk about all things wrestling. You will also receive loyalty badges that show up when you comment on my videos. Remember, becoming a member is totally optional and only join if you are able to. Thanks guys, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. The final WCW Monday Nitro was a historic night in the professional wrestling landscape, conceived with the intention to compete with the WWF and their flagship Monday Night Raw TV show. Eric Bischoff's creation ran for 288 episodes from 1995 to 2001 and included some huge moments for the world of professional wrestling. At one point in time, it was ludicrous to think that the show could ever be taken off the air. It was once not only the most watched wrestling show in the world, but one of the most watched TV shows, period. Of course, when the WWF began picking up steam in 1998, the cracks began to show on WCW programming, and a lack of originality, along with the rise of the Attitude Era, really hurt World Championship Wrestling. Turner executives tried new management, new formats were introduced, celebrities were brought in, you name it, but the World Wrestling Federation was unstoppable on Monday nights. With this in mind, Ted Turner had a soft spot for professional wrestling. Wrestling was a cornerstone in Turner broadcasting, and through thick and thin, Ted Turner stuck with WCW. Turner Broadcasting System, or TBS, merged with Time Warner Incorporated in May of 1996, with Ted Turner himself being appointed as vice chairman and head of Time Warner and Turner's cable network division. So Ted here is still in command, he can call the shots. On January 11th, 2001, however, Time Warner was bought by AOL and became AOL Time Warner. AOL, or America Online, was an internet service provider during the initial early days of basic consumer internet. At one point, before and during their merger with Time Warner, AOL had a stranglehold on the home internet business. They pretty much owned the market, and with this merger saw new executives coming into Turner's already established media divisions, and a man named Jamie Kellner was handed control over the Turner Broadcasting division. Jamie Kellner deemed WCW to be out of line with the AOL Time Warner image. He did not want WCW or any wrestling shows getting aired on Turner TV channels. Ted Turner, by this point, had no authority to stop AOL Time Warner from taking WCW off the networks, and this is precisely what happened. WCW programming was cancelled on TBS and TNT, leaving a huge opportunity for someone to come in and buy the company. Eric Bischoff was interested until he learned that WCW wouldn't have a network to air the shows on, stating that WCW was worth close to nothing without a network to air the shows. Bischoff was under the impression that when and if he bought WCW, he would also be getting a 10-year commitment to air WCW programming on the TBS network. Instead, for sale here were WCW trademarks, video libraries, some wrestler contracts, memorabilia, rings, that sort of thing, but no TV slot. Vince McMahon, owner of the World Wrestling Federation, would make the purchase. It's believed that WCW was sold for around $4 million, although the number changes slightly depending on who you ask, but even still, it sold for an incredibly low amount of money when you consider the revenue that WCW once generated just a few years prior to its doors closing. When Vince McMahon purchased WCW, he ended the Monday night television ratings war. To be fair, the ratings struggle was already over at this point, with Monday Night Raw destroying Nitro in the ratings during the final months of the war. The very last episode of Nitro was to be held on March 26, 2001, and it would be an incredibly noteworthy night for sure. Eric Bischoff said, I didn't watch the last Nitro from Panama City when WWE took over. I couldn't. On a personal level and an emotional level, I had been through so much in terms of what it took out of me in order to build WCW. I became totally detached from what was going on. Before we go any further, a common misconception is that this was the very last WCW show to air on TV. It wasn't. The last WCW show to air on TV was WCW Worldwide, which aired on March 31st, 2001. Granted, this was a syndicated show and it wasn't on cable, but still, officially, this was the last WCW show to air on television screens. It's difficult to find a good copy of this show, but there is a farewell message available on YouTube from this broadcast. WCW Nitro took place in Panama City, Florida annually for a few years during spring break. The final WCW Nitro would also take place here in Panama City, giving the final show a unique look. This final Nitro actually took place at the Boardwalk Beach Resort, hence why it looked slightly different from the other spring break episodes. The last Nitro was dubbed the Night of Champions, with the concept being here that there would be 5 WCW title matches during this broadcast. Many would say that this was the WWE's way of honouring the legacy of WCW, but I personally believe that this was done so the WWE could shuffle around the championship belts that they wanted to shuffle around. The final Nitro was booked by WWF producers. The World Wrestling Federation were overseeing this entire show. Shane McMahon said, "No one knew what was going on with WCW that day. We walked in there and we were considered the enemy just the day previous, and now we are all supposedly joining. So what happens? Is their job security? Of course anyone would have questions because those guys also needed to feed their families." Tony Schiavone said, in the years following the last Nitro, "My future was unknown, our future was unknown. I can tell you there was a lot of crying in the back. We didn't know exactly what would happen, no one knew." So let's run through the show. After the WCW logo is presented on our screens, we are immediately shown Vince McMahon live on Raw. It's such a bizarre thing to see, and I only wish that the world didn't have any prior knowledge of the purchase before this went on the air. It was common knowledge within wrestling circles that Vince had purchased WCW before this final episode of Nitro aired, so just imagine how surprising it would have been if you had settled down to watch Nitro, for whatever reason, and the first thing you see is Vince McMahon. It would have been insane. Vince said here, "Imagine that, me, Vince McMahon, imagine that. Here I am on WCW television. How can that happen? Well, there is only one way. You see, it was only a matter of time before I bought my competition. That's right, I own WCW. So therefore, in its final broadcast tonight on TNT, I have the opportunity to address you, the WCW fans, and you, the WCW superstars. What is the fate of WCW? Well, tonight, in a special simulcast, you will all find out, because the fate of WCW is in my hands." Over on Raw, Vince again started the show and announced that he had purchased WCW. He said here that he would address the WWF fans along with WCW fans and superstars. Vince again announced here that there would be a simulcast later in the show. He then took jabs at Jeff Jarrett here, which I must admit was quite funny. Jeff Jarrett had held the WWF up previously for more money while he was the Intercontinental Champion, and Vince announced here that Jeff was gone. Back to Nitro, when Tony Schiavone kicks off the TNT feed by saying he still doesn't believe what has happened, announcing he is stunned and lost for words as the fireworks explode in Panama City Beach. Ric Flair's music then plays as the Nature Boy makes his way to the ring. Slick Rick goes on to address Vince McMahon's announcement, saying that Vince does not hold the likes of Harley Race, Ricky Steamboat, Sting and the Road Warriors in the palm of his hands. Rick continued to talk about the history of WCW and the workers who made World Championship Wrestling Wrestling a contender to the World Wrestling Federation. It's a passionate Ric Flair promo here, making a point to bring up that wrestling was built on the men who work in the ring, not the office and not management, and nobody can hold the workers in the palm of their hands. Flair announces that if WCW is to go out on a high note, then Nitro should go out with Ric Flair versus Sting. The Stinger had not been seen for months, so this was pretty big. Sting also wrestled Flair on the very first Nitro, so this is truly a fitting main event. I don't think a better match could have been booked to end Nitro, with so much of the focus being on the NWO over the years. It was great that two WCW originals would be closing the doors together. Next up we have a Macho Man Slim Jim advertisement, always cool to see. After this we have an advertisement for AOL, the irony. The in-ring action begins next as we have a title versus title match, US Champion Booker T versus World Heavyweight Champion Scott Steiner. The match is okay, it's nothing to get excited about from an in-ring perspective, but what's noteworthy here is Booker T winning the match and winning the WCW World Championship. In subsequent interviews, the guys who worked on this last Nitro show have stated that none of them knew if they had jobs in the World Wrestling Federation, so you have to think that the World Wrestling Federation had some idea of who they wanted to bring over to New York. A lot of guys were also going to sit out their lucrative AOL Time Warner contracts and collect a paycheck without stepping into a ring, which is fair enough, but the fact that Booker T here gets the world title lets us know that the WWF wanted to do something with him. If you didn't know you had a job, yet you just won the heavyweight title, you'd be feeling that your chances of getting hired were pretty good. Of course, the WWF could have known that Scott Steiner wasn't coming over to the World Wrestling Federation just yet, and they just wanted to get the world title off him as soon as possible. Also, it's quite interesting that the first match here on the last Nitro featured a World Championship match and included a world title change. Next up is another Vince McMahon segment. Here, Vince McMahon rips into WCW in Florida, saying it's appropriate that the last Nitro is being held in a dump like Panama City. Back in the ring, and we have a triple threat tag match. The Young Dragons versus 3 Count, represented by Evan Courageous and Shannon Moore, versus the Filthy Animals, being represented by Rey Mysterio and Billy Kidman. A great high-flying match here, with all guys performing a very fast and high-risk style of match. The winners of this one would be getting a Cruiserweight tag title shot later in the night against Primetime and Kid Romeo. Kidman and Rey Mysterio win the match. We are shown Vince McMahon once again, this time celebrating with Trish Stratus like the creepy old man that he truly is. The next match is for the Cruiserweight title as Chavo Guerrero takes on Sugar Shane Helms, and in terms of the best pure wrestling match of the evening, this is your go-to match. It's not hard to see why these two guys ended up getting decent WWE runs. They were on fire here on the last Nitro, almost wrestling like they were trying to prove a point. Sugar Shane Helms gets the win and keeps the Cruiserweight title. The WCW tag titles are on the line next as Mike Awesome and Lance Storm take on Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Haire. Before the match, we are again shown Vince McMahon, and this time Michael Cole asks him if he could make a statement regarding the WCW staff and what will happen with their wrestlers. Vince kicks him out of the room, and then the feed goes back to Tony Schiavone and Scott Hudson, with Tony letting the fans know that nobody within WCW honestly knows what is going on and nobody has any answers. Tony says that he and Scott can only react to what the fans see, and he also looks genuinely worried here. The tag match goes ahead and it's okay. Lance Storm was always excellent in the ring, and O'Haire and Palumbo actually worked very well together. The champions retained. Every man in the ring here would be brought into the World Wrestling Federation during the invasion angle. Shawn Stasiak versus Bam Bam Bigelow was next, one of the last times Bam Bam Bigelow would be seen on a big platform here. The gimmick in this match was that Bam Bam Bigelow wanted to tattoo Shawn Stasiak for whatever reason, and if Stasiak lost, he would be getting inked. Stacy Keibler distracted the ref and Stasiak gets the win. A real throwaway match here, unfortunately. Diamond Dallas Page is shown next in an interview segment recorded earlier that day. DDP thanks the fans for their support during the days of WCW, saying here that anything is possible if you work hard for it. DDP said that he got to live his dream, but he also says that the dream is not over. He has a lot more to give. Vince McMahon is then shown talking on the phone. He is now ready to go to the ring on Monday Night Raw to address WCW Nitro. The WCW Cruiserweight Tag titles are next as Rey Mysterio and Billy Kidman get their shot against Primetime and Romeo. This is the third tag match of this show, and honestly, I feel this was the weakest tag match of the night. Still, Rey Mysterio and Billy Kidman pick up the win and become champions. Billy Kidman would join the invasion of the World Wrestling Federation, but it took Rey a little longer to make his WWF debut. The Cruiserweight Tag titles would never be seen again after this very match. The championships were only active for a total of 8 days. Next up we see Sting here, and the Stinger is amped up for his match with Ric Flair. Sting says there was no way he was missing this historic night, and he is excited to have one more dance with the Nature Boy. Sting says that he and Rick started Nitro all those years ago, and tonight they are going to end it once and for all. As Vince is seen walking backstage on Raw, Ric Flair makes his way to the ring on Nitro. Flair looks at peace here. He isn't emotional, he's ready to go. Rick said in subsequent interviews that he was actually glad that Nitro was going off the air. He was happy that WCW was being put to rest. During the later years of WCW, Rick felt that his legacy, and indeed the legacy of World Championship Wrestling, had been tarnished beyond the point of repair. It's refreshing to hear someone like Flair, a cornerstone of WCW, being totally honest about how he felt about the company. The easy thing to do here is claim that WCW would be missed and all that stuff, but Flair was happy to see the doors get closed. Give the WWE credit here, this was a great fan service match. There wasn't a better match that could have been booked. Flair wrestles in a WCW Nitro shirt, not to honour WCW, but because Flair had let himself go in the months leading up to this match. Flair himself blames this on World Championship Wrestling, saying he began to stop caring about himself during the final weeks of WCW. In terms of the in-ring action, we have seen better Flair vs Sting matches, of course. With that being said, this one is special, one of those rare matches where the action in the ring didn't need to be on a high level thanks to the occasion. Sting is on great form here though, and Ric Flair is pulling out his greatest hits. It's a fun match, and it should be on your list to check out from start to finish if you haven't done so already. Sting defeats Ric Flair with the Scorpion Deathlock, and the two embrace in the ring as Tony Schiavone can be heard getting emotional on the headset. It's truly a historic moment. We then cut straight to Raw is War. Vince McMahon announces in the ring that he has bought his competition as the Raw feed is shown to audiences at Panama City on the big screens. Vince announces that he will sign the contract at WrestleMania 17 when Ted Turner brings the contract directly to him in the middle of the ring. McMahon goes on to pat himself on the back, saying it was due to his efforts and his efforts alone that allowed him to beat a billionaire and kill off his competition. It's all very Mr. McMahon here, it's all in character, but you can't help but feel that Vince is getting a lot of enjoyment out of this also, and who could blame him? In an interesting moment, Vince lists a bunch of WCW superstars and asks the audience to cheer if they would like to see certain wrestlers perform in the World Wrestling Federation. Vince asks the audience if they would like to see Hulk Hogan and Lex Luger, and the crowd boos. However, when Vince McMahon asks the crowd if they would like to see Booker T, Scott Steiner, and Buff Bagwell, the crowd cheers. The crowd also begins a Goldberg chant. But anyway, Vince says that WCW is going on the shelf. It doesn't matter, it's getting buried and the company will never be seen again. Shane McMahon's music plays in the Raw arena and we expect Shane to walk down the ramp. However, the cameras cut over to Panama City Beach and Shane is there on WCW Nitro. Shane announces that he is the new owner of World Championship Wrestling as he already signed the contract that Ted Turner was supposed to deliver to Vince at WrestleMania. Nitro then goes off the air with Vince McMahon giving some incredible facial expressions. So yeah, the WCW purchase was worked into a storyline. Vince McMahon versus Shane McMahon was scheduled to happen at WrestleMania, and the WWF decided to use the WCW buyout as a way to further the Vince versus Shane storyline. Personally, I feel this wasn't a great move. There was more that could have been done here, and I'm not sure why other WWF superstars weren't sent to Panama City Beach to make appearances on this last Nitro, but it is what it is. After the final Nitro, we would see the invasion angle take place on World Wrestling Federation television, something I will cover in the future. And that was the last ever episode of WCW Nitro. There were some good moments here. If you want a good, steady match, look up Chavo vs Sugar Shane Helms. If you want an iconic and historic match, look no further than Sting vs Ric Flair. All in all, it's a decent show, one of the better episodes of Nitro during this abysmal time period in the company, and it's mandatory viewing for anyone who considers themselves a wrestling history fan.